Hey guys, William here, aka Big Bastard. This is the review that I promised out a little later than I hoped for, but hopefully it'll be still relevant to you guys, particularly since there's so many freaking hate videos put out by the Faker fans, and these are people that haven't even watched Revelation. And you might be wondering why I say that, but literally, basically the idea is, and I laid this out in part 1 of this video, which I'll link here or in the description somewhere. But in part 1 of this video, I discussed the 5 reasons that they keep giving over and over and over, and just driving into the ground, about how bad Revelation is, how woke Revelation is. When you charge them and confront them to provide examples, specific examples from the show, they either get in a circular argument or they won't answer and they start name calling. It's basically typical Trump-tard tactics. Now, if you did vote for Trump and did basically like some of what he was doing but didn't approve of the trollishness of Trump, that's not targeting you. Trump-tards are the cult lunatics that we have seen that just basically live and die at their master's whim. And they've taken it upon themselves to inject their political agendas into all forms of media, whether they were fans or not. You can tell a lot of these guys, which I mentioned in the video actually, so I'm not going to spend too much time on it here, but you can tell a lot of these guys by not only the arguments they make and how the repetitiveness of which they make the arguments, but their other arguing forms of arguing tactics, but also the fact that they don't have a grasp of the original Filmation series. And I actually address how some of the backers of Revelation don't either. That's all in the other video. If you haven't seen it, I advise you to watch it before you check this out. But yeah, just literally you can tell by the way they're doing these videos that they, first of all, they have not seen it, and second of all, that they're trying to hammer out their political agenda to destroy this show based on nothing. They have nothing to go on. Literally, some idiot leaked out some shit that they decided was woke, and it's just been a nightmare for the show. At any rate, this is going to be the review part that I promised. I'm getting to where I'm not going to promise a time for videos. I'm not going to promise videos. I'll just upload them when I can, and you guys will either stay faithful and with me, or you'll just kick me to the curb. I don't like it being that way, but things are too hectic around here right now to do much of anything else. The only comfort I have is I have been fairly regular the past several weeks in getting new uploads out. So going into this Revelation, what I've actually done is I have pulled up the 5, basically the episode listing synopsises. Yeah, I'm not even going to try that one. Basically the episode listings on Netflix for Revelation, and we're going to go, and I'm going to go episode by episode and let you know what, okay, episode 1 is this, episode 2 is this, episode 3 is this. Let you know the major points. I won't try to get into too much minutia, but it's a fairly action-packed show with a lot of consequences from actions. So we're just going to hit as much of the major stuff as we can, but it might end up being a little longer for each synopsis than I would like, ergo not a true synopsis per se. But getting into this right away, so with episode 1, The Power of Grayskull, it does start off, like Kevin Smith said, about 10 minutes, I actually think it's longer than 10 minutes, of our characters being themselves. And the idea is that at the start of any Filmation show, you would see them doing this kind of stuff. Now, this is not a Filmation continuation in either direct or spiritual form. I'll get to that a little later, but right now let's sink into this episode. So the idea is there's going to, and this is why I have to dress so much, because they fucking nitpicked everything in the goddamn episode. So here in this first episode, we see them doing a ceremony for the knighting of the new man-at-arms, the new man-at-arms being Tila. This threw people through the roof, because they decided that, I don't know what they decided. No one ever said Tila should not be able to take that from Duncan. No one ever addressed Duncan in these arguments at all, except for the one jackass who actually thought that Tila would be somehow morphed into the man Duncan, the man-at-arms, because that person was so fucking stupid they didn't even know that man-at-arms is a title, is not a name. This is how stupid these idiots are. At any rate, the argument is totally asinine, falls flat for two major reasons. Because let's say you're awarding the title of man-at-arms on merit. Well, Tila was the captive guard. It's only natural she would be next in line for the title of man-at-arms. Further, let's say it's hereditary, or if you want to be a little more dismissive, let's say nepotism's involved. Then you would still have Tila being the only one in line for the title of man-at-arms after Duncan, because that hereditary line would ensure that. So they went and they pissed and bitched and moaned about this ad nauseum like they do everything else. And really, if you look at it from a realistic perspective, you see there really was no other choice than Tila. At any rate, at the start of this episode, they're doing this ceremony. There's back and forth between two events that are going on. I'm going to primarily hit the smaller portion of the ceremony and then go and discuss the other event in length, so that it's more of a continuous cognizant thing than broken apart like it was in the show. Pardon. So in this, you see the characters truly acting like you would expect them to act at the beginning of any Filmation episode. Cringer is just totally terrified of the fireworks. You see Orko practicing his magic to calm Cringer down, and ends up trapping Cringer in an air bubble. Well, in a bubble that has no air, and it was soundproof, but Cringer couldn't breathe. Cringer scratches frantically. He can't get out. He will get out a little later, but we're going to address that in a moment, because there is some continuity to this with what's going on in the other. Then you see Marlena and Randor having conversation. Just kind of the build up that, this is normal life in Eternia, and here's this big event we're going to celebrate. Meanwhile, at Castle Grayskull, you have, which I thought was actually going to be the triumphant return of He-Man, but it actually ends up being literally the start of the episode. This is the opening scene, if I recall, in the episode, where you have He-Man coming in on Stridor, and he's dressed in a cloak, and he has two prisoners with him. For the life of me, I can't remember the one prisoner other than he was purple, and it was either Spikor or Webstor, but we're going to go with Spikor. And then you have Clawful as the other prisoner. Sorceress opens up the drawbridge, and she goes down to greet He-Man, telling him, even when there's these great celebration, this great big moments in your life, you still are defending Grayskull and Eternia. Then what happens is Spikor becomes Skeletor and Clawful becomes Evil Lyn, with a really cheesy pun of I may not be Clawful, but I am really awful. Sorceress is not really impressed. She zaps Skeletor right away, knocking him on his butt. And she's kind of like, really, are we gonna do this shit now? But then He-Man goes behind her and secures her, and we find out that's Faker. Faker, not Fakor. This gets us back to the palace where you do see, because at first they made it look like, where the hell is Adam? You know, and you think, oh, Adam is here at Grayskull because he's He-Man. And then you realize you were duped the whole time, which I thought was just awesome. He takes, this is the thing I don't understand. Cringer was literally scratching and scratching and scratching trying to pop that bubble. He couldn't. Adam takes a pin, pops it, boom. We also see some little bit of bonding between Adam and Teela here. You know, nothing that indicates romance, but there is that kind of bond that we always recognized from the Filmation episodes. Then you go back to Castle Grayskull. Skeletor and his forces are breaching Castle Grayskull. She had gotten away from Faker. She had gotten run to a central kind of magical column in Grayskull to protect herself. And Skeletor and Faker and Evil Lyn were advancing on her to deal with her. And Skeletor brings in his freaking forces, full frontal assault on Castle Grayskull. And Sorceress is hitting the external defenses, but she's trying to defend against Skeletor's magic and Evil Lyn's magic, and Faker trying to tear down her force column. She's getting really weak trying to do all that at once. Now, she did tell Skeletor, she said, time and again you try to take this castle and you always fail. And he told her, he said, well, guess what, that's awesome, because I'm not here for the castle now. He said, I could tear this castle down all around you. He said, I'm here for what's underneath the castle. This is not a new concept, by the way. This has been done in numerous veins of Masters lore. DCU is one example where under Castle Grayskull there was the foundry of the Elders, basically, where King Grayskull would end up hammering out the Swords of Power. So I'm telling you, Kevin Smith is definitely lifting from DCU, but I didn't realize until recently, because I did read the Star Run. I remembered that it was the quality of the pictures on what I was seeing that I didn't like, but I did go ahead and give it a read, and it is a really good series. And pay attention, if you can get these issues, to the last 3 issues, because that may actually be a lot of build for what we're seeing here, combined with DCU. But not the first time it's been done. Skeletor taps his staff, opens up the floor beneath them except for the central area where Sorceress is, and you see this kind of magical botanical garden. Now, Sorceress is like, oh shit, you know, things are going haywire, and she communicates with Adam while they're in the middle of the ceremony. Teela's on her knees being knighted, and Adam just grabs his head because the Sorceress's mental communication is so intense. And he goes, and of course Teela noticed, she's like, what the hell is going on here? And he goes to Duncan and he says, guess what, we got to deal with this because Grayskull's under attack. And so Duncan goes and literally announces to the room, Grayskull's being attacked, we need to move out. And everybody's just kind of talking amongst themselves like, okay, question 1, how the hell do you know this? Question 2, if you did know this, why didn't you mention it earlier? Because there was no way for him to get that information while they were in the middle of the ceremony that most people could conceive of. So he's like, he turns to Tila and he's like, "Our new man-at-arms, will you lead us into battle?" She raises the sword. She says, "For Grayskull," and they rush off. And you see this big battle outside Grayskull that some people were saying they were disappointed with. In some ways, I understand that. In other ways, not so much, because this was not meant to be the focus of, or a major focus of the episode. This was meant to be just kind of show you some cool action going on the outside. A lot of people were upset at heroes that hadn't been shown. There's no Ram Man, there's no Stratos. You do see Clam Champ, because they're trying to get their token representation in. You know, a lot of people have bitched, and don't come at me until you see the context for why I say this. Go see the other video and the video before that, and you'll see why I call it token representation. Because basically, the people screaming this woke are making way too much big ado about it, because what they're saying that, you know, is representation is nothing of the sort. At any rate, so you get Clam Champ in, and you get several others, but the more popular ones, I don't recall seeing many faces. I don't recall seeing Buzz Off. I don't recall seeing Stratos. I don't recall seeing Ram Man. There were obviously quite a few that were AWOL during this time. But you get this cool battle scene nonetheless. You get to see He-Man flex, which was cool. And then He-Man, Tila, and Duncan enter Castle Grayskull to fight Sorceress Evelyn and Faker. The interesting thing is when Faker originally took Sorceress, I was like, why the fuck is Strider just standing there? I'm like, Smith really fucked this up, because Strider would not just stand there. I haven't seen any of the Filmation episodes for a while. I'm now 40 episodes in. Strider hasn't been introduced. I have not seen how Strider acts, but I'm pretty sure the idea is that he's just more than just a mechanical ride. Okay, he's more than the pony that you put the quarters in and gallop, gallop, gallop. And I would think he would have some sort of defense protocol should one of the masters be attacked within his proximity. Smith did this beautifully, because when you get into Castle Grayskull, you see that standing there is not Stridor. Standing there is Night Stalker, who had been disguised as Stridor. So I gave Smith props for that. So it was almost like a tease for the diehards. You know, let's see how much you really know, because here you have Stridor, and people screw with Sorceress. He ain't doing anything. And boom, then you get in the castle, he's like, psych, that wasn't Stridor. So here you have the heroes fighting, and of course they're going to have to get down into the botanical underground area. And Skeletor had taunted Sorceress. And this was where he said, call your champion. And a lot of people, when we saw the original teaser and the full trailer, a lot of people thought this was going to be Skeletor issuing their end battles, kind of a combat by trial thing. That's not the case at all. He's just mocking Sorceress. Call your champion. Tila is actually one of the first to get in there and get Skeletor's face, and she was on Battle Cat, if I recall correctly. No, she wasn't. But, you know, Skeletor knocks her away, and he said, he kind of really gets in her grill, and he's like, I said the champion. You're no champion, you're his cheerleader. And he really dissed her there, and she was like, kind of just looked like, mofo, I'm gonna fuck you up. But then He-Man intervenes. Him and Skeletor start battling, which leaves Tila to take on Evelyn. And Skeletor is trying to get this celestial power that is contained in a triangular container in the center of this garden. And as he fights He-Man, you actually see that scene with that tree thing reaching over. Now, I said it didn't look like Mossman, but it actually turns out being Mossman and he's pinning Skeletor to that triangular container. Skeletor does something that Skeletor's never done before in any Filmation episode, and he lashes out a deal of flame, killing Mossman, and then he actually jokes about it. And that just enraged He-Man. And if you've seen the clip, the thumbnail for the Power of Grayskull episode, you see where He-Man's charging, and that's literally what happens there, is He-Man charges, and then he stabs Skeletor in the gut. Now, a lot of people are bitching about this because they're like, He-Man's doing something he would never have done before. This isn't He-Man. He-Man believes in valuing life. He-Man believes in respecting life. Okay, Filmation He-Man, yeah, but Filmation He-Man didn't have quite the things going on that we have here, which is one of the reasons I say it can't be a direct Filmation continuation. Because in the Filmation series, Skeletor never killed. Even when he had the chance to kill the Masters and draw He-Man in to his trap, it's not like he was capturing them to draw He-Man into his trap. He could have killed them and still had his trap baited, and he still captured them instead. So you've got He-Man reacting to something that's never been seen in the Filmation universe before, Skeletor killing someone else. One of the Masters, in fact. One of the oldest Masters. And people are just so triggered that He-Man would try to cause a mortal blow on Skeletor. Now, admittedly, it does have kind of a Deus Ex, however you say that, Deus Ex setup, and I'll get to that in a minute. But the main thing is people complaining about this. I give them props in that it never happened in Filmation, but other sources have had He-Man kill. He-Man has abused his power without even realizing it. In the DCU, he literally created Trapjaw, because when he was fighting Trapjaw, when he was a humanoid, more humanoid, not cybernetically enhanced, he's trying to run. He-Man takes his pistol, he hurls it, Trapjaw turns around, and man, that thing tears off the bottom half of his jaw. He-Man never even realized it. He-Man went on to get some other guys that he was going after. So this has happened before in other content. Is it Filmation? No, it's not Filmation, but when you're trying to up the Filmation series to something more adult, to something more where there are stakes, then you're going to have this kind of stuff going on. Now, He-Man, at the same time, he basically lost control, and he went to stab Skeletor with a move that most people would consider a killing blow. If you were to effect that move on an actual human being, it would be considered lethal, particularly when you got a sword as big as the Sword of Power being thrust by a man that's as big as Arnold Schwarzenegger. Yeah, that's a killing blow, and that's what's pissing a lot of people off. I think it's an invalid argument, or at least a superficial one, because if you have the context of the show, you understand that something like that can happen. I understand if somebody can sit there and say, I just really didn't like that. I don't mind the other things of the show. Hell, man, this show is not woke at all, but I just didn't like that. I can understand that. But to hang on these points like these faker fans do is just ridiculous. At any rate, the DX that I was talking about being set up is Skeletor leans over and he says, "So you finally use that sword the way it's meant to be." And Then He-Man pulls the sword out, and Skeletor says, "Has the key to..." whatever the hell the thing was. And obviously that had to be set up that way because He-Man would never deliberately use the sword. Power Sword has the key to open that up. Well, Skeletor falls off to the side because he is wounded. Evil Lynn is kind of panicking. She goes over. She's trying to heal Skeletor. He pushes her away. And he starts to get up, and he's running this speech about this power source, and I don't remember what it is. But basically, he wants to tap into it, so he takes his Havoc Staff, and he cracks into the orb. And then all hell breaks loose, because all the power is literally escaping. Now, everything freezes, and Teela notices this, and she's like, everything's frozen. And the sorceress is telling her, time is more powerful than magic. I can not hold this back permanently, but I can hold it back for a few seconds. And Teela's like, they're discussing their options, and they're finding out that literally there's nothing else that can be done, that the world's going to end right here. Kabam. That's over because this power was not meant to be released. And He-Man says, well, what if I call upon the power of Grayskull while I'm in this form? And Teela's like, what do you mean while you're in this form? And the sorceress said, it might work, but it could kill you. And he's like, I'll do it. And Teela's like, did you catch the part where she said it could kill you? And He-Man's like, if I don't do it, everybody dies. So, standing there, he calls on the power of Grayskull. And he starts absorbing this power into the blades. Now, ironically, the sword breaks, not because He-Man breaks it, but the sword breaks into two because this power is so much that even the sword of Grayskull can't contain it, but is able to contain it between the two swords. And Skeletor's looking, kind of in awe, and Teela's looking in awe because there's this thing going on while He-Man's channeling this power into the Power Sword. And that's a reversion from He-Man to Adam. And of course there's a lot of, it's hard to say blast effects, it wasn't really blast effects, but there's a lot of atmospheric turmoil from the intensity of the magic. And so, they're kind of covering their eyes, but Teela looks over and she sees Adam holding the swords, and she's like, what the hell? And she looks over and she sees Battle Cat become creature. She's like, what the fuck? And Skeletor sits there and he says, all that boy? He's like, he's holding all that power between all that power in the world between those two swords, and it's just a boy. And then of course Skeletor, in typical Skeletor fashion, starts to rise up and says, that power is mine. And then he goes to grab, and kaboom, you got like two charted outlines on the step thing where the He-Man tried channeling it. So you go, and obviously, that there's some kind of idea that they're giving that, oh my god, look at what happened. Evil Lynn, she gathers up Skeletor's Havoc Staff. You can tell she's really affected by what happened. She fades into the distance. Teela is just kind of like mind-boggled. But you don't see her exact reaction until you go to the palace. And this is one where we're going to cover another common bitched about bullshit thing. So at the palace, Duncan, he approaches the king, and you can tell Marlene is all nervous, and he lowers his head and he tells King Randor, he said, My king, I regret to inform you that He-Man has passed away in performance of his duties. And Marlena just sobs. And then she goes and she clutches Randor and burying her head in his chest and just sobbing. And it was like, okay. And he's like, turns to Duncan and he's like, you know, we will set up a memorial for him. He was truly Eternia's greatest champion. And then Marlena looks up at him and she literally screams, he was our son. And Randor's like, what? And he turns to Duncan and he's like, no. He's like, Adam's safe. He's like, Adam's safe. And Duncan, then still keeping his head lower, tells him, Your Highness, He-Man was, Prince Adam was He-Man. And then Randor just fucking loses it. He turns on Man-at-Arms. He calls him a traitor. He tells him he's losing his rank, his privilege in the kingdom. And he tells him, he says, I cast you out. He says, if I ever see you again, I will kill you. And you can see Teela's not taking this well. And then he turns and he addresses Teela and he says, Man-at-Arms, get this piece of trash out of here. And she's like, no. And he's like, excuse me? And she goes on a tear about how, you know, she's like, you guys knew. And she wasn't talking about Randor. She turned to Marlena and she said, you knew. And you didn't tell him. Referring to Randor. And she's just kind of going off on this deal about how they kept a secret. Now this has been targeted. This is another contention point that's been targeted ad nauseum by these fucking faker fans. They're like, oh, you know, this is the most unrealistic writing ever. You know, this is, and she fucking explains it in episode 5. So if they, for those claiming to have seen it, okay, if they're spitting this argument out, you know they haven't seen it because she fucking explains it in episode 5. But they're like, no, wow, and shitty writing. And basically their biggest complaint is that Teela is a selfish bitch. And their biggest complaint was that Randor was an intolerant piece of trash for turning on his most faithful servant like that. Okay. And I try to explain to people. I'm like, this is coming from the same place for these two characters. Grief. Because neither one knew, even when Marlena knew, neither one knew that Adam was He-Man. So, not only do you find out that Eternia's greatest champion has died, you find out that your best friend, in the case of Teela, and your son, your only son, in the case of Randor, has died. Do not tell me, I'm a writer, I know how this shit goes. Do not tell me that that is not going to cause some catalytic reaction from the people involved. Don't tell me that they're not gonna, you know, everybody's like, oh, you know, man, Randor should have just patted Man-at-Arms on the back and said, I thank you for your service. You've done very good, Man-at-Arms. And Teela should have just went into an eulogy, a beautiful eulogy about Adam and how great he was. You know, this is how it works in real life. Which shows you these idiots, these asshats, don't get any fucking exposure to reality at all. They're constantly on their computers, they're on their cell phones, and they're in basements, literally having no contact with the real world, because they literally think that these expressions of grief are unrealistic, which is just total bullshit. So Teela tells them, she's like, I'm done. She's like, I'm done with all of you, and I'm gone. And that's where she takes her tiara off, throws it in the floor, That was the part where she had mentioned something about being done with monsters and magic, etc. And then she just leaves. And that's the end of episode 1. So, I didn't think it was the train wreck everybody was thinking. A lot of people are saying they stopped at episode 1. That they wouldn't watch any more than episode 1 because it was so full of trash. The complaints that they're bringing out, you literally don't see those in the show. You literally don't see them in the show. If you are watching with eyes wide open, you don't fucking see that shit. Now, there are some complaints that will have partial merit, as I explained in the other video, and we'll be touching on that when we go into episode 2. Okay, so looking at the time that this is taken up, I think I'm going to stop here, and depending on how long the future episode synopsises are, I'll probably do it video by video so that you're not getting too much crammed into one setting. This is for episode 1, obviously. I'm going to work hard to get the others out. I know I said what I shouldn't say, but this definitely where we feel like a incomplete thing if I like stretched it out over weeks. I'm going to try to hustle and get these out reasonably fast. But I think right now it's best to just stop where I am, given the time mark. And hopefully you guys will enjoy this. Hopefully you guys will want more episode synopsises coming, because I am going to push them out. But hopefully you guys enjoy this. I've literally given you almost the entire breakdown of the show. You can see there's no woke elements. You can see there's no agendas unless someone's looking for it. But I advise you and encourage you to check it out and make your own judgment. Because unlike these idiots that are trying to tear the show down and destroy it based on their opinions, based on the fact that they don't like what someone said might be coming out, and they tried to destroy it ahead of time based on that, I ain't going to do that. I want you to watch it. I want you to make your own informed decisions. But I've covered all the major points. I hope you can see that the people going out and saying this bullshit about the show are just literally full of it. And it's sad, because they are damaging the reputation of the show so much that people are saying we might not even get a second season. Now, to finish half of the second season, but a second season beyond that as well. I feel really bad for Smith. I don't agree with people who have said that Netflix is trying to distance themselves from this. I didn't watch the video. I don't know what that's being founded on, but I really hope that that's not the case, because it would be really sad. The handful of pissed off assholes with a political agenda could get out and tank a show that fast before it even gets off the ground, just because they have nothing better to do than hate anyone that is more successful than them. So that's the episode 1 synopsis, and I will get the others out as fast as I am able to. But I hope you enjoy this. If you like, thumbs up and subscribe. And this is Big Bastard signing off. See you next time.